Hello, everybody, and welcome to another one of the Interna Fireside Chats. We'll be talking with it about a number of things about AI and other stuff today. And so, why don't we present it at a conference in New York, about a week and a half ago. And one of the questions I was asked was, how does particularly generative AI and large language models, Chat GPT, has it changed product management and AI and the relation to it and how we build stuff? I've got a bunch of thoughts about this, but I don't know if one of you guys wants to jump in before I tell you some of my thoughts. I'm going to tell you what I think. I'm going to tell you what I think. With generative AI, we have two additional problems. We know with building products, we want to build small and release constantly to get market feedback. We know that we believe we know what the market wants, but until something gets out there, we don't really know. And by releasing something, we change the market anyway. It's the Buddhist, you can't walk twice in the same stream. But with generative AI, we have new problems. The two new problems we have is the technology is changing quickly. So what we can do today is different than it was yesterday, and maybe quite literally in today and yesterday. And then by working with it, we discover new things we can do. So my argument is because the technology is changing so quickly and we're learning so quickly that we have to release even faster. We have to release all of the time. And so we need to think about the engineering process differently, the product management process differently, and the feedback process completely differently, faster than we ever did before. And so even if you're releasing multiple times a day, you need to instrument the systems so you can understand the impact and be able to analyze that impact and iterate the next, rethink what you're doing faster, not just releasing multiple times a day, but think about what's on the roadmap much quicker. Do you guys agree? Do you guys disagree? And to the extent that you agree, what changes that mean?
It's a new idea to me. And we've spent a lot of time, years, learning to do that release cycle as quickly as we can. So if this somehow requires us to be faster, does it also somehow enable us to be faster? Because I'm all for making that cycle as quick as possible, but I think that we all probably do that already. So what's really changing here?
My argument is what's changing is the feedback cycle. Go ahead, Ed.
I was just going to say, I'm not sure if the feedback cycle gets faster through because of generative AI. I mean, you still require user adoption, right? You still need to collect information about usage, right? So you can analyze product market fit if you're at the early stage or impact of your changes over time. You may, with AI technology, may be able to analyze the data they've collected from the user a little bit faster, maybe get a little more insight into it. But I don't think that's something that necessarily shortcut the whole most of the time in terms of actually getting the user adoption. I'm thinking about AI in terms of the impact to product management, not so much, more in terms of it as a tool for the product managers, right? I mean, it's not a whole lot from my perspective. One part of it is it's not unique to product managers. It's a tool that is very good at summarizing, generalizing, right, making sense of things, but with the caveat that it struggles with truth sometimes and facts. It is very persuasive, it really digs in on a hypothesis, right or wrong. And so what that means is demands product managers to be a lot more, and in a lot of ways they already are, editors and fact checkers of information. Instead, before it's just a lot of the information and semi-formulated claims and requests from the stakeholders. Now you're getting it from a much broader, much bigger thing called generative AI. But it really put a lot more demand on product managers to fact check and edit.
Go ahead, Mark. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Eddie, but go ahead, Mark.
Hello.
A couple of comments. One is, yes, I think AI will have an impact on product management. And yes, I think it can shorten cycles. I think, though, we have to think through where we're at in the AI adoption cycle. And you have to also believe that AI will continue to get more powerful and perhaps more dangerous over time. But where it's at now, there are many aspects of the whole product management cycle where AI could be useful, including, I think Eddie also alluded to this, gathering, collating, making sense of information in terms of feedback from users, cutting down on the time that it takes to do research, taking on some of the grunt work that product managers have to do, not replacing the product manager, but potentially making their jobs easier, more efficient, and maybe replacing some of the lower level analyst type functions that we have to invest in today.
So is your argument then we don't go faster because we need to go faster because the tools are changing, our knowledge of tools are changing. We're going faster because we can, because the product management function has less friction. Is that your argument, Mark?
Yeah, I think that sums it up.
So let's say you get the feedback that Mark's talking about. This is for anybody. You get the feedback that Mark's talking about, and you get a bunch of data, and you're in the product group, and you're having your instantiation of large language models, generative AI, read that data. You're in product management. There's some kind of hallucinations that your generative AI can do. How does that change your process? How do you think about that?
Doesn't remove the need for quality control, for one thing.
Does it increase it?
I don't know.
I'm very concerned about hallucinations.
Very concerned about what?
Hallucinations. The generative AI just making stuff up. It seems to, just as Eddie was pointing out, it seems to do that with some frequency. Always confident, never in doubt. Or sorry, sometimes makes mistakes, but never in doubt.
It does.
What do you guys think? Yeah, good.
I think it does, but does it do it so much when you are feeding it the information you want it to analyze and summarize and collate? I think it does it less so in those scenarios than when you're simply just asking information. In other words, if you feed it the appropriate data, you're likely to get back the appropriate response with less likelihood of hallucination. That's my understanding anyway.
Yep. So your argument is choose the right corpus, and you're more likely to get the right results.
That's right.
From everything from generating prose to generating code, we've always had people who've been inclined to Google stuff, copy and paste, have code snippet files, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's always led to things that had unintended consequences when they did that with something they didn't understand or didn't verify. I look at this as the better technology, but with the same requirement. Neither in kind of generating prose or generating code or anything else is this a substitute for knowing what you're doing. And I mean, you may get an idea, a structure, something to work with, something you can edit. But I think mostly it demands of us that we not regard that as the end of the process, but the beginning of it.
It's true, but at the same time, it's happening at a much larger scale and a much bigger, faster speed. Right? It's like having gunfights versus having nuclear weapons. Yes, you're having a weapon, but it's just in a way bigger scale that is a lot harder to control and unleashed. Right? Versus having one polar, and now you have people use generative AI to generate complete systems, even, right? And it becomes a lot harder to validate that things are actually working correctly. In fact, I mean, we've all done I'm sure we've all tried like ask ChatGPT to generate our profile, right? And it's plausible that I could have done that because of what I do, but no, I didn't actually do that, right? It becomes a lot harder from a product manager perspective when a lot of times, especially in the agile world, right, that stories a lot of times, unfortunately, are not well defined from an acceptance criteria perspective, right? And it becomes a lot harder to determine, hey, does this really do what I want it to do? I'm talking about using generative AI to actually code generate.
Mark?
Yeah, one more thought. We tend to jump on things very early, and that's good. We should, but we have to recognize it's very, very early days. We're really seeing generative AI in the mainstream. And so the story has not yet fully unfolded yet. One very important takeaway for me is that it does behoove anybody in software development, and frankly, and maybe in many, many fields besides that, to really understand where AI can be useful and not get left behind. All right, because your competitors will be doing it. I've seen people jump on AI to make product pitches and to come up with the latest and greatest new idea, or to do some of the PM work we're talking about. That's not necessarily to say that it is ultimately over the long term going to be that much more successful than humans were. I don't think we know yet. So watch this space.
Right, and I think that actually that's a really good point. I think that backs the question of, just like in anything we do, right? We have better tools. Where should we focus our time? Where should product managers focus their time? And I found myself having actively dissuading people from going to college to learn software development. Me with a CS degree, so I found it kind of interesting when, as I think about it, it's learning software development is not the most important thing if you want to work in software development. And that's especially true for product manager. And now the question is, with all these tools, right? I mean, the question is where they should be really adding value over the UI2, right? It will probably never replace kind of the visionary North Star. What should the company be? Right? What's the ultimate goal? What industry space? Right? What problem is trying to solve? You're not going to ask generative AI, right? What problem should I solve? But from there,
yeah. Sorry to interrupt. That brings me to the next. You bring up software engineering and dissuading people from going into software engineering undergrad programs. I want to talk about prompt engineering for a bit. I have this argument of prompt engineering. It's called engineering, maybe to be cute, but maybe not accidentally. My experience, particularly with ChatGPT, but some of the other generative AIs, is if you don't write your prompt well, you won't get stuff that's particularly meaningful. My model here is that we've had a series, and I think I talked about this last time, in the history of computer science, we've had a series of higher level languages. And each higher level language becomes much more expressive in a much more limited field and much more powerful in that field. Being HTML to express interfaces, abstracting away interfaces, for instance. Powerful language in a more limited area. Prompt engineering, I would argue, is an even yet more powerful language, but it has two attributes that are different than other languages. One is it's not well constrained. You can say anything. And second, it's not only not well constrained, but the nice thing about higher level languages is it's going to be very powerful in its domain, and it's going to be right in its domain. With prompt engineering, as we talked about before, it might be wrong in its domain, right? So it's wider, it's less constrained, and less likely to give the right result. Is prompt engineering?
I'll take that first. I mean, it's not. To me, it's journalism. It's the biggest differentiation is it to other high level languages. It's non-deterministic. Prompt engineering is good good prompt engineering is good journalism, where you are asking the right question to get true insight from the person you're talking to.
Mark, I think you're gonna disagree, and I think Jeff's gonna disagree too. So, actually, let Jeff go first.
I'll surprise you, but there's more. I agree that it's with Eddie about how it's being used now. But it just so happens I had about a 3-hour conversation with a friend and colleague who's trying to do a prompt engineering startup. And a lot of his interest is around things like solving the constraint problems that Eddie raised, or maybe it was Mark, I'm sorry. For instance, if you want this thing to be the embodiment of NPCs in games, instead of just having a little exclamation point above their head and they have a set speech, and if you stay long enough, they repeat their speech, it can really...
For the audience who doesn't know, NPC.
Non-player characters. In a lot of immersive worlds, there's certain people who are actually played by the computer that you have to talk to, and they say, "Oh, there have been bats invading the woods over here. We need somebody to go, kill 20 bats," and that gives you your next little quest or whatever. So this is a case where the conversation being more native and fluid and more human-like makes the game better, but there are also fixed points you have to get it to, where it has to communicate those things. And that's a problem they're interested in trying to tackle. And it has, that's useful in not just games, but a wide range of possibilities, such as using them in customer service and in other spaces. So I think there is potentially an engineering practice in learning how to interact with these systems to get them to behave in certain ways. But so far, I don't think that's really developed. I think that's in the future rather than something we see today. Right now, I think you spit some text out, it spits something back, you like it or you don't, you try to, say a different thing, ask a different way. But when you can start to control some of the behavior of the underlying systems, I think that'll look more like engineering.
So your argument is, I'm putting words in your mouth, you didn't actually say this, but it should be engineering, but we're too ignorant to make it engineering yet. Is that your argument?
Essentially, I would have worded it a bit differently. I'd say the tools are a little immature to approach them in an engineering fashion.
Good.
And in this kind of industry, that's months, maybe not years. I mean, it could be.
So we don't need to hire. So Jeff and Eddie both are saying we don't need to hire someone with an engineering mindset to interact with generative AI to get good results.
That's actually not quite what I'm saying. I'm saying
great.
There are skilled journalists have their common practice, right, to get good answer. So there is a science to it. It's not all just some magic person that just knows to talk to people. So there is a science to it. So it's not quite engineering, but I'm not saying that it's definitely a skill. It's definitely a learned skill.
And it's an analytical one, and one that's organized in ways that engineers tend to think, and I don't think journalists do. Realizing that if you include this word or you ask, for this kind of structure or something, it has this kind of effect. And then engineers are good at that kind of thinking. I don't think that writers think that way as much. I think they're more likely to spit something out, get something back, and then try to edit to fit.
Mark, what say you?
I think I'm somewhere in between Eddie and Jeff. There's a surprising amount of literature on prompt engineering, actually. And I've seen articles encouraging the use of prompt engineering and sort of attempting to train people on how to get the most out of LLM and AI in particular. But I don't think, and this is probably where I agree with both, I don't think you need a hardcore engineering skill set in order to take advantage of that. You've got to be logical. You might be better off being I don't know if they still teach logic formally at university, but if you could be a logic major or an English major, perhaps you might be just as well off as if you were a computer science major. There's the two exceptions to that. One is if the AI interface is designed for prompt engineering. In other words, that's the way it wants to interface with the outside world, unlike ChatGPT, which I don't think is. But if there's an interface that's designed for hardcore prompt engineering, well, there's a way to take advantage of it. And the second one would be, of course, if you're using AI to generate code, then you'd better be an engineer, I think, in order to do that. And maybe that's another place where prompt engineering comes in. So those two caveats.
Yeah, boy, what you're saying, Mark, reminds me that Shakespeare might be wrong. He said in one of his plays, I think it was Macbeth, first kill all the lawyers. It turns out there may be use for them, logical, and knows how to interact with things.
First kill all the lawyers, then kill all the engineers. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's stop at step one.
Note to stealth: watch the lawyers, because it may be coming for me next.
Exactly. Okay, so we have all this cool AI stuff, or maybe not. Sometimes scarier for some folks. Should it be regulated? Now I know that this is a potentially interesting conversation. Regulation could kill. I know you would, Jeff. That's why I'm asking. Go ahead.
All right. In addition to just in general as a philosophy of law, I think that it's far better to take liability for harm that's done rather than prior restraint through regulation. I think it's particularly important in our industry. I think the reason why we've essentially revolutionized the world economy in the last 30 years is because we were left almost completely alone. And when in the later stages of some kind of technology, you start to see things like GDRP or SOX or some of the stuff that happens after decades of doing it, the same thing always happens, which is there becomes a much bigger focus on bigger organizations that can hire and support compliance departments and things of that sort. And it's extremely selects against startups and small individual projects because they can't afford that overhead. And AI is just at the very cusp of just starting to be important. And doing that anytime soon, I think, will absolutely crush it by eliminating startups of the sort that I just described my friend trying to do. The only countervailing argument would be giant, imminent, major threat that AI is different from other things because they're going to try to take over and become our robot overlords. And I just see no credible argument for that.
I have a different argument. Misinformation generation. We have an election coming up.
Mm-hmm.
What's that? More.
Said,
yeah, right. Oh, no, yeah. Misinformation generation, making politicians saying things that they didn't actually say in a credible way, having data support it that you then generate and create and publish on whatever a news site is. That there is a significant potential threat with generative AI to do things in mass that we're never able to do before.
And I think that's where
Mark.
the scale. Mark,
yeah.
No.
I was going to say, Mark or Eddie, do you want to go?
Yeah, I think that's where the scale of how quickly and how sophisticated the misinformation can look when you generate that through some kind of generative AI technology versus individuals. I mean, there's I wouldn't say no difference, but how do we regulate individuals spreading misinformation, like telling lies? How do we regulate that? How is that different from regulating a piece of software generating the same information? The big difference is in the scale, right? It's not the intention of it. So I don't have an answer. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just, but my point is, it's
we've just kind of killed them. Shakespeare's just kind of killed all the lawyers. So
there's the same way we regulate people doing bad things, right? We should have similar regulations around people deploying systems that do that kind of thing, at least intentionally. But the risk is much higher for a system to go awry unintentionally, because just the scale and the speed and the sophistication in terms of like visualization and the look, right, in the video. We've all seen deepfake videos. I don't have good answers to that, but I definitely do think regulation has a place.
It needs to be regulated, bottom line. However, I think we have to recognize the challenges doing that. It's kind of an arms race. We can't assume that China and Russia will want to regulate AI or will follow our regulation standards. In fact, we should assume they probably won't. And that in itself presents some kind of an existential threat. But today, the the AI Safety Institute, that may not be the exact right term. One of those AI safety institutes, actually a Center for AI Safety, said today that AI represents the threat of an extinction event for humanity. Wow. And they're all signed on to that, all the leaders. And when you listen to Sam Altman in Congress, these guys seem to be begging for oversight. And as usual, our government is several steps behind in regulating technology. But I think we need it. We can't assume that these companies are going to regulate themselves. How you deal with the threat from foreign powers, I don't know. Have to leave that to somebody else. It's above my pay grade.
I'll let Jeff have the
Actually,
last
Mark,
word here, and then we'll move on. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. You saying?
I think Mark brought up a really good point. Our government is notoriously bad at dealing with all things technology. Right? Half of our senators don't even know how Facebook make money. It's free. Why? How? Right. So the question is, and we have parties, like Mark pointed out, that is not going to respect any kind of regulation, even if we have good regulations. It's more of a question now: what does the industry do to survive? I don't have an answer to that.
I'll let Jeff have the last word here.
I think that, I might feel differently about this years from now, but I think that in the short term, to raise the kind of concerns, particularly those that you raised, Eddie, is to define outcomes that are unacceptable. For instance, we have laws about slander, we have laws about using a person's likeness without their permission and compensation, etc. And those may need to be adapted because of things that simply aren't addressed in the law because they weren't possible before. But that's different from trying to regulate the structure of how AI systems are evolved or used, and rather, that you might be able to solicit a murder online, in the dark web, doesn't call for regulation of the internet so much as it calls for murder being illegal and making sure that enforcement and investigation can support that. Being able to create politicians saying things they didn't actually say, probably because of public figure restrictions and some other things aren't strictly illegal now. I think I would welcome changes along those lines because we're now able to do that and doing it as destructive. But I think it's just too much of a break on the entire industry, and the very external parties like other countries that you're concerned about not only might do their bad things, but will get far away from us if we have to suffer the break of AI regulation and trying to function.
Okay, lightning round. You just one word answer. Maybe I'll go for more. The evil AI overlords killing us all. Percentage chance. Jeff, you're first.
0.
0. Eddie.
100% depends on time frame.
Well, okay.
Okay. In the next 10 years, the evil AI overlord's killing us. Jeff, I'm going to start again because Eddie made me better define my question. Turns out that prompt engineering for David is a problem. Jeff, in the next 10 years.
Now I feel more comfortable with my 0.
Okay. Eddie.
Speak the next 1,000.
50%, but indirectly.
50% indirectly. Okay. Mark.
0%.
I'm going with the correct answer, 0. So
yay, we won. The zeros.
It's like the McLaughlin group. He always came back with the correct answer. Okay, I'm changing topic.
What's Eddie, you've been voted off the island. Sorry.
We're technology optimists here.
No, I'm changing topic completely. Agile, offshore, asynchronously. You got some teams. You've got some teams where you're at, some teams offshore. They're working different shifts. How do you do Agile in that world?
I can add a little bit at the beginning. Because I've done this a lot over the last 15 years, and I've always just arranged the stand-ups and ceremonies at times that were plausible overlaps If it's Europe, you're usually doing it in the middle, early in the day in the U.S. and vice versa if it's somewhere over in Asia. It requires some extra work because there's some things beyond just daily stand-up and other ceremonies that you have to interact to be doing Agile correctly. But it just requires some stretch on both sides. That's the only solution I found. Maybe somebody else has a more in-depth answer.
I've got an answer, but I'll let someone else go first. Eddie, you got a thought here?
I mean, to me, the stand-up is actually probably the least important ceremony that needs to happen synchronously. I mean, I think the retros refinement actually, to me, are more important. I think for the stand-up, there are a lot of stand-ins. Like, there are all kinds of chatbots or tools, or even like TikTok-like. Because I've used tools where people take TikTok-like video updates. And then they send it together, and everybody's reminded to spend 10 minutes in the morning to watch everybody's video. That actually was quite effective because a lot of times when it's not done well, stand-ups devolve into basically status update. They start focusing on how do you unblock each other. So for that, I mean, I think a video is very effective in helping create a sense of togetherness, despite the fact you're not. Like my daughter have best friends that she has never met in person, never been in the same continent, but they are best friends because they see each other like video. They watch each other's TikTok and Instagram. And so I think there are all kinds of asynchronous communication tools. I think especially like these short video that can be pretty effective. But there, to Jeff's point, there's nothing. To me, I'm part old, but there's nothing that can totally replace in direct interaction. But those can be limited to just the key ceremonies, the retros, right, and the refinements. Even the refinement can be done asynchronous to some extent.
Mark, do you have something before I chime in?
I think team structure is important. I know not everybody has the flexibility, but if you want to do asynchronous agile, I would argue that you organize your teams along geographies so that each team can work independently and be co-located. And you only need to get together for when you need to sync up, or often that needs to be. But if you have one person here and one person there, and they're all in different time zones, you're making it very, very hard on yourself. And why take on all that pain unless you absolutely have to?
So I am in the same camp that Mark's at. Is try to collate your team with a nuance difference. It depends on how much change you have in your product. If you have a highly innovative product where you're learning from the market, you have to iterate quickly. You better have your teams be able to talk frequently at low friction. If you have a very well specified product that doesn't change, this API talks to this API, then having dispersion among people, particularly among product managers and engineers, becomes a lot easier. The thing that concerns me is one of the fundamental tenets of doing Agile is favoring conversation over documentation. And so to the extent that we scatter people on a team to a variety of places, and we make them document things as opposed to having conversation, that concerns me that we're getting less agile. I think Mark's got an additional note here.
If I've learned one thing about Agile over the many, many years, and it's maybe only one thing, to be honest, and if I'm even more honest, it's something I kind of decided deliberately to ignore in the beginning. It's the value of people over process, which, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, is actually in the manifesto. There's just no substitute for that. If you have great people, you can make almost anything work.
Well, great. I think that's all for today. Thanks, everybody, and thanks everybody who's listening. And people have any questions, feel free to reach out on the website. There's a contact us, and we'd be glad to respond to more questions. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.